So for me, I feel like although I preach buy when you need to upgrade, and despite myself being a business where time kind of is money and I need processing power, I still find myself using a first-gen Ryzen Threadripper from 2017.
Ooh, wow. It's like you're running a car with like two wheels flat, and then like,
much, yeah.
Diesel in a petrol engine. It's insane, dude. How are you gonna get any work done? How do you publish that many videos out there with that stuff in there?
Me and Lori have talked a little bit, but like, what is your thoughts on 12th gen as far as the jump in performance, and is it worth like that wait for people?
So far, I've only tested one single laptop, which is like the best case possible for 12th gen, which is the MSI G76 with the i9-12900HK. So best of the best, I suppose. So the multi-core performance was next level, as you would probably expect from a 14-core, 20-thread part. Wasn't too unsurprising, but the single-threaded boost was that's pretty decent. I was a bit surprised about to see how high it was. It was more like 20%, I think, compared to the best 11th gen that I personally tested anyway. So yeah, that was pretty good for a single generation. Definitely bigger than the jumps that Intel has had between previous generations, because I've kind of felt that they've all been, if you've got like an 8th gen, 9th gen, 10th gen, it's all a bit the same really. I think 11th gen was a bit of a boost, but yeah, it seems like 12th gen is taking things to the next level.
Yeah, and that's what Lori was finding on like the desktop chips as well. As far as the single core performance, like that's really like for me as a like more of a content creator rather than like gaming, like that's where it matters most to, I think, a lot of me and Lori's audience is like, is the single core performance actually going to, or like, focus performance inside of one app really going to give you that much more lift? What were you most impressed by as far as the use case tested?
I've only tested it out for like a couple of days so far, because it kind of arrived and then it was like, oh, the embargo's in 2 days. Go
dang.
Do whatever I can to get something out.
Yeah.
So I've got plans to do a bunch more testing on it. But from what I've seen so far, it's topping the charts in like creator workloads like Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Premiere. I think it was at the top of DaVinci Resolve. Can't remember 100%.
Okay.
But yeah, so it was a little ahead of the MacBook Pro 16 with the M1 Pro. Okay. So I don't have the M1 Max, but
in which
from my understanding,
or like which specific one?
So I can only fairly compare with Premiere, because I think at the moment I use the Puget Systems benchmark, and from my understanding, their benchmark isn't available for the M1 native version of Photoshop. It's only available for the x86 one, and I figured it wasn't really worth doing that comparison, because if the M1 native version of Photoshop exists, then people with a Mac would probably just use that. So why should I bother benchmarking the other one? Yeah, and also the battery performance on M1 is next level. So I have actually tested Cinebench on the MSI G76 on wall power and on battery power, and I've compared that with the M1 Pro. So the M1 Pro is the exact same score, whether you're on battery or wall power, it doesn't matter. But the G76, it dipped down from, I think it was about 17,000 multi-core score in Cinebench to about like 12 or 13,000 on battery. Okay. So it was like 100 points ahead of the M1, but it was still a pretty big dip, whereas, the M1 didn't have that.
So
I thought that was pretty good.
So it still was ahead of it as far as the performance, but you're probably going to have about an hour and a half of battery life compared to your 7 to 10 hours.
Plus it was a ton louder.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my word.
Let's not forget that. Oh, and of course it's much thicker too and heavier. So
yeah, and a little bit,
all kinds of trade-offs.
A little bit less attractive in multiple ways.
But to take this a little bit further, Intel's been kind of jogging in the back of AMD and Mac. Maybe even Apple has been, behind there, but AMD's been like killing it since the Ryzen, especially 5000 series. Everyone was talking about that, and this is like Intel's second attempt on Ryzen 5000, right? So do you think this 12th gen has woken suddenly the beast of Intel again, and we can actually see what Intel is back in the game doing compared to like Apple and AMD?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's pretty safe to say. So just, the new 12th gen stuff is just significantly better than the 11th gen stuff. I mean, I've still yet to fully compare like 11th gen and 12th gen side by side, because I've actually got the i9 in two different GE76s, so I should be able to do a somewhat fair comparison there. But yeah, in terms of AMD, obviously like Ryzen 5000 was pretty good, and might even be one of the reasons that Intel's had to kind of get their act together lately, I guess. It'll be interesting to see how the new 6000 stuff goes. I'm not expecting it to beat Intel because, well, I mean, there's obviously a core and thread count difference. So in any kind of like multi-threaded workload, Ryzen will probably still be behind just because they're topping out at 8 cores, 16 threads, whereas Intel will have 14 cores, 20 thread parts. I did see some like leaked benchmarks, I think, of like Geekbench and Ryzen 6000. I think they were claiming like 30% higher single core score. That sounds a bit much to me. Yeah. So I guess we'll have to see. But yeah,
well, I mean,
who knows really?
Yeah, go, Laurie.
Do you reckon the 3D cache technology will be on the 6000 series?
From what I've heard, I don't think it will be. I think it's only that one desktop processor at the moment, which was like the 5800X3D.
Yeah.
I can't remember the names.
Yeah, it's that.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I remember when Intel had their kind of keynote, it was like 44% boost in performance. And then as they hit the market and they get in our hands and you start testing, it's like, okay, well, it's actually in app in a specific workload use case, it's actually 20 to 25%. And so with AMD claiming 30%, I'm like, okay, so what, we're going to see like 10 to 15%, like it's almost like, it's like half like what they say. Which is interesting because, and interesting you say multi-core, because forever last year when I was testing a lot of stuff, it was like Ryzen was always the multi-core champ. And now it's like, whoop, we flip back, and I'm excited for that debate between everybody.
Yeah. I guess it also depends on like power draw. So last year I did my best to fairly compare an 8-core Intel against an 8-core Ryzen. And at lower power limits, the Ryzen chip was more power efficient, so it would win in multi-threaded benchmarks. But then, like if we push both to the max, putting as much power as possible, the Intel one would just do slightly better, but it was using significantly more power in order to pull that off.
Okay, yeah.
That is very, very interesting, because I've done the test on desktop for 5950X and the 12900K, and the same systems, right? 3090, the same amount of RAM, and then I just wanted to measure which one would consume more energy or electricity, and I got the opposite actually, because I put the Puget Bench Premiere Pro extended workload through, and then recorded the power consumption for both of the systems, and I found that Intel was actually much more energy efficient, which everyone says, whoa, Intel is 240 watts, from the, full power. But then on a workload, because of the efficiency cores and because not all the time can you utilize the CPU 100%, the actual idle on Intel is so much lower than Ryzen, which made the overall consumption like less. But to hear that from a laptop perspective, like core to core, which is interesting, because I had 16 cores on Intel and 16 cores on AMD. Obviously, one of them is hybrid cores and one of them is just performance cores, all of them. But that's very interesting to hear, actually.
Yeah, I guess it also will depend on the workload. So in the past, when I've tested like power draw, I generally just use a really heavy multi-threaded stress test like Blender or something. So I haven't tried with like Adobe Premiere. So it could potentially be different with other software like that, more real-world stuff, I guess, depending on what you're doing.
Yeah, the way it's optimizing or the way it's using the software. Yeah, it's interesting because like a lot of people think about, speaking of like power draw, like actual like from a battery in a laptop, a lot of people have thought that like Ryzen is going to be better battery life, but throughout tests, like a laptop equipped with, the Intel like Evo platform, like those like i7-1165 G7s versus like a 5800U or a 5700U, the Intel will often get more battery life. Now, obviously I'm not pushing the laptops in a custom way. I'm allowing them to do their thing, but it's also been interesting there that you'll see more battery life out of that unit, and also sometimes once you plug it in, slightly more performance. So like the way that they're balancing the performance and power consumption can be better in Intel actually, even in 11th gen. So I'm curious as they get 12th gen mobile chips, what that'll look like.
Yeah, that's a bit different to what I've seen.
Okay.
I guess I mostly focus on the gaming laptop stuff though.
Yeah.
So I don't think I've ever even tested like a Ryzen 5000U series.
Okay.
I've only done like H series. But from the H series stuff, at least in the battery tests I run, generally Ryzen is both better in terms of runtime, but also better in terms of performance on battery.
I agree. I
At
agree
least
with
for
that
H
for
series.
H series. Absolutely. Like I've seen like the HS, those are insane with battery life. They are so efficient. And then you're right, like the H from Intel, it's like it's terrible. So it's so interesting how the divide can split between those two user bases and expressions of the CPU.
And then M1 comes along and destroys them all. I actually finished my battery test of that earlier today, and it's the top of my graph by far.
Yeah,
like,
it's like
not even close.
Way up there. It's like, oh, you can't even see it.
It's completely different.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your thoughts on power or efficiency per watt for the M1 Pro Max chips? Because like they are very close to, you know, the top what AMD and Intel are doing, right? But consuming considerably less power. Like their chips like consume, I don't know, 30 watts. I think the GPU is a max or something like that. Compared to like what 175 now with the 12th gen. Is it 3080 Ti is 175 or something?
Yeah.
So it's like, what's your thoughts? Because like, if Apple if they're gonna come up with like M2 this year, what's it gonna be like? Because
yeah, well, I mean, I guess that's why, like what we were saying earlier, the M1 stuff just obviously it's in a thinner machine and it's able to run quieter because it just doesn't need as much power, and that's why the battery life is so good, and also why the performance on battery is so good. So yeah, it's pretty impressive what they've been able to do.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about what a user might need, how much performance is necessary. So like, where's the trade-off between, okay, you can do all of this. You can export in 55 seconds. You can, have 0 drop frames and playback at full quality. But at what point is the performance irrelevant? So what, where's that sliding scale where you could be fine with like a i7 12 800H?
The 700, 600.
Okay.
Honestly, can't remember.
I know. It's so confusing.
There's so too many.
So is that fine? Or do you need to go up? So I think that's a lot of the part where the confusion of people is like, okay, let's wait for 12th gen, but what 12th gen chip should I wait for? And it's like, there comes a point where you don't need to be able to do full 4K performance at, a full quality timeline. You would be better off getting something with better battery life to last longer. And so that's where I think about like this question of, should you wait for 12th gen or should you not? It's like, you need to understand your workflow. Would you guys agree or disagree that like you should really be self-reflective on what you're doing with your tech?
Yeah, I'll go first. So I think it definitely depends on the actual workload that you're running. But I guess a lot of people, at least based on the comments that I read on my channel, they might not necessarily really know what they're doing. Like they might want to game one day and then another day they're just watching YouTube videos. Like, you don't really need 14 cores, 20 threads to get that done or anything. Yeah. But at the same time, unless there's like someone's specifically made content to say, hey, this thing is what you should get in order to have like a baseline for performance in this application, you don't really have any way of knowing, I guess. And that's kind of a problem I've got with some of the benchmarks I include in my own reviews. So like I do like the Puget Systems stuff, and I just show a number and see how like one thing compares against another, where it sits in the lineup. But when at the end of the day, when you look at those numbers and overall scores, it's not really telling you like what kind of experience I'm actually getting while I'm video editing on this thing. So yeah, I think that's one of the things that I've tried to do, being very specialized for creative professionals, is like, hey, this is exactly the drop frames you're going to get when you run this timeline. And I've wanted to do the Puget score, but like I find so much more transparency and clarity behind the actual using that project file and exporting the clip and stuff like that.
with Photoshop, it's awesome because there's so many things you could do in Photoshop. I'm like, you could be doing all kinds of things, but mostly people are video editing. Sorry, Lori, what are your thoughts?
It's a very good question because I've recently seen a lot of people like on my comment section, and they're saying, look, yeah, 12th gen is awesome, but we already have rumors out about 6,000 series AMD, 7,000 series AMD. Should I wait or should I go for 12th gen? And I've had to say, look, like, if you think that way, you're never going to pull the trigger and you're just going to wait forever. Like, there's always, whenever the competition releases something, the other person is going to put some rumors in the water. Oh, look, something's going to come out. Well, wait for us, you know, don't spend your money yet. But, like, who knows when this is going to be available? Whenever 6,000 series AMD comes out with, you know, the CPUs and GPUs, they're going to do the, you know, refresh in GPUs as well. Whenever that's going to come out, what's the, you know, the market going to be like then? Who knows? You know, you're going to be waiting on a line. How long? You know, people are still waiting on a line for GPUs since like 2 years ago on a EVGA like queue. So think about like what's available right now. What gets your work done like really right now? Just look what's available. You can see there's, I don't know, pick up 5 different laptops, PCs, towers, whatever, you know, you want to buy, and then just look at the reviews on them ones that are available. I guess it's a little bit different when we're just about to launch something, like when there's lots of reviews out there, and when it's just about to launch something else. For example, in a few months' time, maybe like, you know, Q3, when the 12th gen has been out for quite a while, then you might be thinking, do you know what, let's wait for a month to see when the 6,000 series comes out. But if you're thinking like that in the beginning of a release of something, you're never going to buy anything.
Yeah, something I always try to tell people is, you know, if you need something right now and you need to get work done, then you have to buy something. You don't have a choice. The only exception is kind of like what you said, if you know something is like imminent. That like right now, we're probably going to have like, I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming there'll be like Ryzen 6000 benchmarks sometime in the next few weeks or something. So maybe if you're thinking about buying a Ryzen 5000 system and you can wait like the few weeks, then yeah, sure, you might as well. Because, you know, maybe even if you don't go for that new system, the old system that you were looking at might have a nice sale or something.
It's true. But I guess with creative professionals like me and Ben, like our general audience, it's a little bit different because often the tech they buy for themselves is for business use. So they really have to think, okay, is this going to help me get, you know, work done in my business faster? Am I going to just waste my time by, you know, lagging on my 6th gen Intel, you know, PC tower or something? Or should I just pull the trigger on the 11 or 12th gen, you know? But I guess,
sorry, I was just going to say, well, I guess in that case, it depends more on if, like, is time money? So if time is money, then yeah, definitely upgrade because, you know, you save time by a faster machine, then maybe that allows you to end up earning more and it pays for itself.
Yeah. Yeah. My biggest thing is like with that is make sure you're not lying to yourself about that. Because I feel like people can totally justify that. Like I had somebody on my channel one time, they're like, yeah, I just bought the latest MacBook Pro M1 Max 14. I was like, oh, that's insane. I'm like, I can't even buy that. You know, it's like, I was like, yeah, how much was it? He was like, oh, it was like $7,000. I'm like, how are you going to make that back? Like, you know, unless you're a production company doing a massive amount of money, like you got to think about every time you do a job, half of that job goes to pay this and pay that. I'm like, that's going to be a long process back. It's an expensive machine. So be honest with yourself about that aspect. So, gosh.
100%. I think business owners actually, you know, in the end of the tax year, they realize, we have some money to spend, you know. So what do I like, you know, and we'll just put it on the business expenses. Yeah, I'll get a nice Mac laptop, you know, we'll do some work on it, some emails, you know.
It's so true. So, you know, if it were you guys, would you go for like, okay, your business, right? Are you going to buy an 11th gen or Ryzen 5000? Or are you going to wait and buy 6,000? Not even like, let's say they're coming out in like a month or two. There's like enough where like it matters. I'm curious.
So for me, I feel like although I preach buy when you need to upgrade, and despite myself being a business where time kind of is money and I need processing power, I still find myself using a first gen Ryzen Threadripper from 2017.
Ooh.
So I've been wanting to upgrade for like 2 years now, but the problem is they just haven't put out a new Threadripper in that time. So the current Threadripper is like 2 years old already. So it's kind of like, yeah, I could upgrade, but do I want to spend thousands of dollars on something that's already 2 years old? Not really. So just based on how I've behaved on the desktop side, I feel like if I was in this situation with laptops, I'd probably just wait the month or whatever and see what was coming.
All right.
I'm just curious, Jarrod. Like, what are you waiting for until you like it's time to pull the trigger for the PC?
Yeah, I've just fallen into the trap of waiting for the next best thing to come, even though I know that this is how tech works and there's always something just around the corner. But yeah, it's also the fact that, you know, AMD was meant to have the new Threadripper like last year. Well, they've been putting out new Threadripper every single year until they stopped. So,
interesting. So
yeah.
It was a question, and then I want to get to Lori's. Do you guys think it's because there was not a big enough market for it? Because that is an expensive CPU.
So I heard that they were just... So from my understanding, the Threadripper chips are basically stuff that they can't sell as Epic for more money. The server stuff. So I think they've just had so much demand, and with all the chip shortages and that, I just think they haven't prioritized it. That's my guess.
Gotcha. So
I think I would agree on that, because AMD has taken over the server kind of industry. I think Intel's been slacking down on their Xeon's chips for the server stuff.
Those are
AMD's efficiency for the server stuff, like 128 cores for the Epics. That's insane amount of power, and for the big server guys, that's like huge like energy win and space win to have just like less big towers in your warehouse. So I think you're right over there that all those Threadripper chips have gone there. But I'm curious, like, when's the Threadripper 5000 gonna come out, or are they gonna put out? Sorry, I'm gonna go on that trail now. Is it gonna be Threadripper 6000 now?
I would say, yeah.
I don't know, but all I know is I want it and I need it, and it needs to hurry up.
Well, it's crazy because, like, I'm looking at that. You're right. It was the 3970X was the last Threadripper. Yeah. I'm actually running a 3900X, so I'm not even that powerful. But like,
well, I could get into it, but I've got so many problems with the 1950X. So just to list three off the top of my head, the 10 gig NIC on my motherboard died, so I'm using gigabit to my NAS, which obviously slows transfers down a lot. Well. I have to run with 8 of the 16 cores disabled for stability. And I have to run memory at DDR4 2133, again for stability. So there's just so many compromises because it's like first gen stuff, and it just needs to be replaced.
Wow.
It's like you're running a car with like 2 wheels flat, and then like
much,
diesel in a petrol engine. It's insane, dude. How are you gonna get any work done? How do you publish that many videos out there with that stuff in there?
Well,
it's a bit of a struggle.
That's impressive. Good on you. Good on you. I feel like my 3900X might be more powerful.
It would be. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just questioning whether you should actually send that laptop back to, hardware
unboxed.
That's it, hardware unboxed, because like that is much better than what you're running right now in every single way, pretty much.
Here that destroy my Threadripper PC.
That's fantastic.
I mean, seriously, are you actually editing on that Threadripper PC?
Yes,
wow.
It's not too bad.
Okay.
There was a few months ago. There were a few weeks where, like, if I didn't reboot every 3 days or something, everything would just be terrible. But somehow magically, it's been stable the last few months, so I haven't been complaining.
All right. See, okay, right here, everybody, audience, right here, the Jarrod from Jarrod's Tech is running an older Threadripper and making it work. And so that is inspiration to use what you have and upgrade when you need to.
Use what you have.
Not when you want to.
I need to and I want to, I just can't.
He does. Oh man. Lori, what would you upgrade?
Upgrade or not to upgrade? I think the 12th gen, what I have seen, obviously my experience has been on the PC side, full tower side. Like, they are so good, especially for video editors. I can't tell you enough how good they are. And then even like the budget CPUs like the 12400, like at $200 or so, wipes everything out of the price range. Sometimes I saw that like trading blows in Photoshop and After Effects with chips 3 times its price, like 11900K or something like that. So the 12th gen is seriously like insane upgrade
across the board.
And if across the board, like anything AMD offers for the same price range for desktops, it just beats it out. And like I'd go even so far to say that if you are maxing out 12900K with like RTX 3090 and let's say 64 gigabytes of RAM, DDR5 that is, then that in overall scores is like beating out Threadripper Pro's 64 cores 3995WX scores. And when I did those benchmarks, I didn't believe it. And it's just because the single core and the iGPU inside for creators is just huge. Those media engines that play back stuff is like as good as the Apple's M1 Max encoders, what I've seen in their SoCs. So if you are from any of the previous generation of Intel, even from 11th gen to 12th gen, it's going to be a huge upgrade. Even if you go from 11900K to 12600K, that's from i9 previous generation to i5 current generation. The i5 is like better pretty much at every single thing. Yeah, it is. It's everything's better on the i5 than on the 11900K, so it's insane.
Yeah, the i5 looks pretty good. So I just before this, I just finished recording a i5 12400 versus 5600X comparison.
Yeah.
And they're very close in both games and applications. I think Ryzen had a little bit of an edge in games, but yeah, it's just so much more cheaper. Like Ryzen costs 45% more money at Newegg right now, and the motherboards are kind of similar. And you can get DDR4 on Intel 12th gen.
Is that on gaming applications only, or did you do any other applications?
So I tested a bunch of applications. On average, they were very close together. Sometimes Intel was kind of far ahead, sometimes AMD far ahead, but averaging everything out, they can't trade blows really. So it comes down to the price difference. And then in games, it was kind of similar. But for the most part, Ryzen was ahead, which I suspect is probably just because it has more cache, which is why AMD is doing that whole add more cache thing.
For me, if I were going to go for it, I would go, if I had the benchmarks, it might help me. But being that we all think there's not going to be that much of a lift with 6000, I would probably pull the trigger on like a Zephyrus G14, G15, or the Rogue Flow X13. 5000 series. They were just so good. And it's just, for me, I'm like a little more on the frugal side when it comes to things. And those would be plenty for what I do. And they have great battery life. They run fairly cool depending on the application. And I'm really a big fan of Asus right now. Like their stuff is really impressing me. And so that'd probably be where I would go.
So the question is, are you going to wait for Intel 12th gen or Ryzen 6000? Definitely comment below and let us know. And if you haven't subscribed to either of our channels, definitely make that happen. More videos like this always coming your way. I'll see y'all here on the next one.